Welcome back, everyone. It's Eric from Rare Candy. Here today, we are back on the channel with yet again another Unified Minds deck profile. And today we're going to be looking at like a Fossil Toolbox style deck. I guess it's probably like the best name for this thing. But we played the new Archeops, played the new Aerodactyl GX, a bunch of fossil Pokemon like that. Just because we finally got Pokemon Research Lab, which looks to give fossil Pokemon a much needed boost, I think. And actually, too, this is the same list that was recently featured in our Testing Rounds video, so if you guys do want to see how this deck looks in action, I will, of course, have a link down below in the description for you guys to check that out. And, of course, too, if you guys are unfamiliar with those Testing Rounds videos, they usually kind of feature some of our more unrefined early lists that we used to start testing with, so that means there very well might be some things in this list that could be tweaked or improved upon, just something to keep in mind as we do go through this early deck profile. Let's get right into it. Up first, we have 4 copies of Jirachi. And Jirachi just in general is such a good card, as everyone is pretty familiar with, I'm sure. But in this deck in particular, I really do like Jirachi. And one of the big reasons is because one of our primary methods of evolving is through an item card, unidentified fossil. So we can actually hit our unidentified fossils off of Stellar Wish. Of course, the new Stadium Pokemon Research Lab, which we'll be getting to as well, to more easily step our Pokemon. But also, since our unidentified fossils aren't technically Pokemon until they're in play, that means we can't start with them at the beginning of a game, which means our odds of starting with Jirachi are much higher than in a more traditional deck. So that is something I really do like about this deck. So definitely want to max out our copies of Jirachi here to increase our odds of starting with it. But from there, getting into more of our Pokemon, I guess we can count this as a Pokemon. We have 4 copies of Unidentified Fossil. So of course, this is going to be one of the primary ways we can get our fossil Pokemon into play. But you can put it down as a colorless 60 HP Pokemon. It can't retreat, but you can discard it from play at any time. So like I said, we can find this off Jirachi, which is nice. We can't find it off Pokemon Communication, which is honestly a bit of a bummer. But we do have some other ways of getting our fossil Pokemon into play as well. But playing 4 of that. And going on to our first attacker, we're going to be looking at, we have Archeops, but first we have 3 copies of Archon. And kind of a reason for the higher count of this is because Pokemon Research Lab is going to allow us to get the Stage 1 fossil Pokemon into play. So we want more physical copies of Archon and the Stage 1s if possible. That's why we're playing kind of the thicker count here, as opposed to like a more rare candy reliant sort of build. So we're playing 3 of that guy, but of course we're playing 4 copies of the new Archeops. So Archeops is, I think, a pretty cool new card from Unified Minds. I think it's slightly more under the radar, but has 2 pretty interesting attacks. The first of which is U-turn, 40 damage for colorless energy, and switch it with one of your bench Pokemon. So I think there is some natural synergy here between this and Aerodactyl GX, but honestly, I don't really use this attack too often. I think Hyper Beam is just generally going to be better most of the time, and Hyper Beam is going to be a colorless energy, 80 damage, and you discard an energy off your opponent's active. So an automatic discard is actually really solid, I think. Thinking back to energy retrieval all the way from back in, the late 90s when the game first came out, they eventually printed a Stadium that was like a hard counter to energy retrieval because of how strong those cards were. So don't underestimate the power of like an automatic discard effect like this. So Archeops is going to be kind of our early game attacker, and that's why we're leaning so heavily on it. But next up, we have 2 copies of Aerodactyl, and this is not Aerodactyl GX. This is going to be the older one, all the way back from, oh man, was this Forbidden Light? I think. It's an older one. Oh no, Team Up. It's more recent than that. My bad. But we're playing this mainly for its second attack here, Fossil Fangs. 3 colorless energy, 90, plus 90 more if you have no Pokemon EX or GX into play. So this is actually a really nice cleanup attack. The math works out very nicely with Archeops. So for example, if we go Hyper Beam to do 80, or more likely it's going to be 100 since we do play Diancie Prism Star here as well. 100, discarding energy off our opponent's active, hopefully forcing them to commit another energy to an already damaged tag team, and then from there we can use Fossil Fangs to come in and clean up. So the math works out very nicely between these 2, and actually probably going forward, this is one of the things I do want to play with. I think probably a more equal split between these 2 Pokemon will be better. I actually started out with a fairly low count of Aerodactyl, and the more I've played with it, the more I've been upping it. So I think I might even want to try in the future maybe like a 3 split between both of these. So maybe like a 2-3 Archeops, a 3 line of Aerodactyl. That's something I do want to try out going forward, but these cards definitely have a lot of synergy together in terms of their damage output. So that's going to be our other primary attacker. But up from there, we have a couple of other support style Pokemon. The first of which is going to be one copy of Carracosta. So this is actually a card I think is generally pretty bad, but it actually does have some synergy here. Just because it does evolve from unidentified fossil, we can rare candy into it, maybe in the mid game. But we're playing it basically just for its ability. We do have access to its attack, but its ability says your opponent's tool cards in play have no effect. So that means spell tags, skateboards, primarily, those are going to be the big ones we're going to be turning off here. So we can turn those off, and I think that's going to be pretty relevant, especially against Malamar. This deck, I think, otherwise has a really bad Malamar matchup, so this sometimes can help you a little bit there. And then also, it does have an attack worth pointing out. For a fighting in 2 colors, does 80 plus 20 more for each energy in your opponent's retreat cost. So we do play triple acceleration energy in this deck, so we can make use of this if we need to. But you know, generally speaking, we only are playing it just as kind of like a Malamar tech to deal with you know, some of their tool cards that they have. Then up from there, we have one copy of Aerodactyl GX. So this kind of seems like a low count of Aerodactyl. I know this has been a card that's received a relatively decent amount of hype, I guess, from the community. But it has this ability, your opponent's, well, whenever it's your active Pokemon, your opponent's basic Pokemon need 1 more energy to attack. So that is pretty handy. Between this and the Archeops, we have some pretty disruptive options for our opponent's energy that we have here. But we're mainly playing Aerodactyl as more of a cleanup attacker. So it does have a primary attack for our fighting 2 colors to do 120. That's fine. We can one-shot Pikarom with it. That's perfectly reasonable. But its GX attack is really the thing that I'm mainly playing this for a fighting energy, 50 for every energy on your opponent's active. So Archeops, it does kind of like a okay amount of damage, but it really needs some cleanup attackers to be able to come in and finish off some of these knockouts for it. So that's why we're playing the Aerodactyl GX. And also another thing I do want to point out about Archeops here is that it's actually a very, very efficient Dedenne GX killer in terms of closing out games, because even without the Diancie, you hit for 160 with weakness, making it to be able to where you can, you know, pick off some of those Dedennes for some cheap prizes. And then going on from there, we just have one last Pokemon to round out the deck, or round out the list. It's going to be one copy of Diancie Prism Star, of course, to make our Archeopses, you know, hit for a little bit better, just because Hyper Beam for 80 is fine, but 80 is just kind of an awkward number in a lot of situations. So that's why we're playing the Diancie, of course. So going on from there, looking at our trainer cards, we have 4 copies of Lily and 4 copies of Cynthia here. So kind of our staple draw supporters that we have in this new format. So just a nice shuffle in and draw 6 on Cynthia. And of course, Lily, draw until you have 8 if it's your first turn, draw until you have 6 on all other turns. So this is kind of the main duo of supporters we're seeing. But I am trying one copy of Erica's Hospitality in this list as well right now, just because we don't have something like a Dedenne GX to really bail us out of a dead hand. So I'm playing, we do play Pokegear in here as well, but I'm leaning on a 9th supporter instead of a 4th Pokegear, just because we really don't have any great ways at bailing our hands out otherwise. So trying the Ericas to see how it's doing. It's been pretty good so far. Can't really complain too much. But going on from there, we have 4 copies of a new card from Unified Minds, very, very integral to this deck. That's going to be the new Pokemon Research Lab. So this card says, once during your turn, you can search your deck for 2 Pokemon that evolve from unidentified fossil, put them on your bench, and then your turn ends. But you know, even though that is kind of a harsh penalty to this card, this is fantastic on the first turn. We can't really do much on our first turn anyways in terms of attacking, so this is like an ideal way to end our first turn. We can search your deck for maybe 2 Archon or an Archon Aerodactyl, and then from there on our second turn we can start attacking, or even if we can't find an energy, a lot of times I don't even mind just taking another turn to use this to reset up our board. So absolutely fantastic card. Fossil Pokemon needed some more support. And yeah, really liking this card a lot in this deck. So going on to the rest of our trainer cards, we have 4 copies of Pokemon Communication. Unfortunately, this is the best form of search we have in a deck like this. Fighting Pokemon in general just don't have very good searching options. Pokemon Communication is like kind of lackluster here, just because 4 of our Pokemon can't even be found. And we can't put unidentified fossil back with Communication. So in this deck, Communication is a little bit weaker, but it's literally like our only option. So of course we put a Pokemon back into our deck, get a different one. It does have synergy with Research Lab, which is something I do like. So if you open with a couple of your Archons, you can put one back in your deck and then get it into play immediately with Research Lab. So next up, we have 4 copies of Custom Catcher. This is a card I really don't like to play in this deck. I think this deck needs a lot of other things, but you almost have to play it just because you're never taking one-hit knockouts. You have to clean up your knockouts at some point, and Archeops just doesn't hit for quite enough to reliably two-shot things. So you are going to need this to clean up games and clean up knockouts. Also, Custom Catcher, like I said, it's just too good with the Archeops to be able to knock out the Denes not to play. So that's why we were playing the Custom Catchers. Of course, play 2 and bring up one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. Going on from there, we have some switching options. Of course, 2 copies of Switch, but then also 2 copies of Skateboard. Skateboard, of course, is going to be more for our Jirachi. Switch is going to be more for some of our clunkier Pokemon like Carracosta, if it ever gets brought up, Diancie Prism Star, if we're unfortunate enough to start with it, etc. Going on from there, we have 3 copies of Rare Candy. So this is a card we're not really playing in like a super high count. We're not maxing out 4 just because Research Lab is going to get some of our stage 1s into play for us, so we don't need this as frequently as most decks. But a lot of times in the late game, where you can't afford to take a turn off to use Research Lab, Rare Candy is going to be much more efficient at setting up your last Archeops or so to close out a game. So this is actually a card, though, I want to kind of experiment with a lower count of. Like, I might even try a build with like 2 Rare Candy, or maybe even none. I'm not really sure just yet, but I'm trying to get down the right split of candies to Archeops to baby Aerodactyls. That's kind of, I think, the biggest things that are still kind of in flux and in progress with this deck. But feel free to play with that if you guys want to. And then from there, 3 copies of Pokegear. Like I said, right now, the reason for the lower count is because we don't have a way to actually bail us out of a dead hand, like with a Dedenne GX or something like that. So that's why I'm leaning more on the 9th supporter as opposed to the 4th Pokegear. I just want to make sure, since we have no other ways of bailing our hand out, that we have, better odds of hitting a supporter off our remaining Pokegears than if we played only 8 supporters and 4 Pokegear. Hope that makes sense. So that's going to be all of our trainer cards, guys. And then going on from there, we have some energy of 4 copies of Triple Acceleration energy. So of course this will work with our Aerodactyls, even our Archeops. If we don't have one of our fighting energies or something like that, we can still use this since Archeops attacks for colorless energy. Also, if we need to, we can use this to fulfill Carracosta and Aerodactyl's first attacks as well, but primarily for our baby Aerodactyls here. So next up, we have 4 copies of fighting energy. So of course we're going to need these to be able to attack with Aerodactyl, potentially with Carracosta or Diancie if we absolutely have to. But we do need fighting energies for Aerodactyl, so that's why we're playing those. And then we are playing 1 copy of Recycle Energy as well. So the reason for the Recycle Energy here, Archeops attacks for just a single colorless energy. So Recycle Energy is actually going to be our best energy for using that attack, but the reason we don't play more of these and the heavier fighting energy count is because we do need to be able to find fighting energies on the turns that we need them whenever we do want to take a quick knockout with an Aerodactyl kind of out of nowhere. We need to be able to rely on hitting our fighting energies more so than hitting a Recycle Energy. But it is nice for when we do find this thing. Basically says here, whenever it gets discarded from play, it comes back to your hand. So if our Archeops gets knocked out, we get Recycle Energy back. If we retreat with it, we get Recycle Energy back. If someone uses something like a Crushing Hammer, we get it back. So just probably, like I said, our best energy to use if we are attacking with Archeops here. But yeah, guys, that's going to be our attempt at like a fossil toolbox style deck here. Like I said, kind of the big things going forward that I want to tweak on a little bit is going to be maybe evening up the split of Archeops and Aerodactyl to 3 of each. And as a result, you might need to change potentially the Archon count or maybe the Rare Candy count to compensate for the slightly lower count of Archeops. But I think that's really what I would try going forward with this deck. But of course, I hope you guys did enjoy this deck profile. As usual, feel free to like and subscribe. And if you guys can, consider supporting this channel by becoming a patron over at patreon.com/rarecandytcg or by picking up some merch from our online store, rarecandytcg.com, like the playmat you saw in this video as an example. It would mean a lot. But as always, guys, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.